Namo Namaham Sarvesham Bhavatam Svaгаtam. In last several years, I've been receiving quite a few requests, people asking me to explain and read or translate many other Sanskrit texts. So after thinking and trying to figure out the best way to do this, I think the best way to do this is to make video. Now, why do I think that? Actually, there are two reasons. First reason is that Indian tradition is an oral tradition. And both my experiences as both a student of Sanskrit and Sanskrit philosophy, and also as a teacher and a translator, in my experience, the best way is to actually, the easiest way to learn the text and to understand the text is if somebody is directly explaining that to a student. This is by far the most easiest way. It is really impossible for somebody, especially if somebody has no background in Sanskrit and philosophy, to take any translation, a book, and then just go through it and understand what's going on. This is really simply impossible. So, as for example, if there is a translation of Tantraloka, complete translation of the Tantraloka, shlokas and Jayatha's commentary and the notes, it would still not be enough for people to understand what actually is going on with the text. One would still need a teacher to explain and say why, and what is going on here. Another thing is, let's see. And then the second reason is that there are fewer and fewer people now, even in India, who know Sanskrit properly and who actually are able to read these Shastric texts. And so I think this is some kind of my small contribution also to actually read these texts and explain them and record them on the video. And of course, I'm going to do this just, the way I learned from my teachers in India, and mostly in Varanasi, but also in other places. So this is the reason. Now, what am I going to do? What exactly I'm going to do? I'm going to take a number of Sanskrit texts, and I want to emphasize not only Shaiva texts. Usually people associate my work with Shaivism, which is of course true. This is where my primary interests lie. But in order to be able to understand Sanskrit text, one has to have a background and has to understand what's going on in other texts also. Why? Because, for example, if you read Tantraloka or any other Tantraloka, and Abhinavagupta there would argue with the Sankhya's and Nayayikas about various issues. And if you don't know the argument, one will simply fail to understand what is going on. Because Abhinavagupta, when he was, at that time when he was writing, he assumed that the reader would know the Sankhya and definitely Sankhya, Nyaya, Mimamsa, and other texts also. So I'm going to take several texts, Sankhyakarika, Nyaya Bhashya, portion of Nyaya Bhashya, Artha Sangraha, which is the introductory text of Mimamsa, then Brahma-sūtra Bhashya, a section of Brahma-sūtra Bhashya of Śaṅkara, and also make them read, translate, and explain them, just like this on the video. And but also, I want to emphasize that I'm going to also do the same thing with Shaiva texts. And I, in particular, want to say that I'm going to do chapter 6 and 7 of the Tantraloka. These two chapters I have studied extensively, and I strongly feel that I have something to say about these two chapters. Furthermore, I'm going to do a text called Nandikeshwara Kashika, and the text is a short text, but exceptionally interesting and important, because this is the first, you can say, phonematic emanation, the description of the phonematic emanation of the universe in the form, the manifestation of the universe through the unfoldment of 50 energies of Shiva, who on this gross level assume the form of Sanskrit alphabet. So Nandikeshwara Kashika is the commentary, is the explanation on this inarticulate, 14 inarticulate sounds of Panini and Shiva Sutras. And so Nandikeshwara explained the meaning of these sutras. And then also we have a commentary by Upamanyu, who comes a little bit later, but still. But the important thing is that the tradition places Nandikeshwara at the time of Panini. So this I'm going to do texts. Then how am I going to do this? I'm going to do this. I will record these videos. I don't know, maybe every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, one, and each video should be roughly between 40 and 50 minutes. Sometimes maybe longer or shorter, depending on the subject matter that is discussed. And then I'm going to make these videos available on my new web page that is now almost about to be completed. Today I'm going to do, what am I going to do today is I'm going to start the whole thing by reading Shankara's Mahabhashya. Of course, this is a huge text and it will take many months and many videos to complete the whole text. So what I'm going to do today is, what am I going to do? I'm going to read a section of it, which is known as Chatusutri. And in India, traditionally, this is studied in this particular way, because most of these texts are huge, long, and take quite a long time to go through it and then to understand. So one cannot really do this. One is supposed to read, this is how it is in India traditionally taught. One is supposed to read a section of it and get some understanding of the original texts of that particular school, and then devote the time to his favorite school, to the school that he likes the most, and study that in depth. So that would allow him to have a good grasp of all the arguments of all the other schools. So today I'm going to start by reading Brahma-sūtra, Śaṅkaracharya's introduction to the Shankaracharya's introduction to the first sutra. And that itself is like 3 pages long. And after we go through this Chatusutri, one, if really wants to learn, if one really has a desire to learn, one can have a good understanding of the basic principles of Advaita Vedānta. But before I go on, I just want to say a couple of important things, making a few important points about the philosophy of Advaita Vedānta. So for Shankara, the Brahman is the only reality. Then the world is an illusion. It is unreal. And then Jiva, the individual self, also is said to be identical to Brahman. Now, in Upanishads, we find this expression, this Mahavakya, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. So Shankara, of course, now he has to explain that. He has to explain why and how is Aham, how is that I am identical with Brahman. So he really has difficulty explaining it. It is not very easy for him. He has to rely here. First, he says that this Aham is not used in the primary sense, but in the secondary sense. So, but Even that is not very helpful, so then he, in a very roundabout way, he has to rely on something he called Jara Lakshana to explain. At the time when I'm going to be reading Nandikeshwara Kashika, there is Upamani also discusses these 4 Mahavakyas. And at that time, I'm going to go into depth explaining the meaning of these Mahavakyas and what they mean for Shankara and what do they mean for Advaita Vedānta and how their understanding differ from one. So at this point, this is just enough to say for people that people can understand what's going on. Next, now the question arises, if the Brahman is the only reality, then where from all this multiplicity, duality arises that we experience in our everyday experience? For Shankara, this is caused by Maya or avidya. And that Maya or avidya is beginningless. Mithya jnana nimittaha, it is caused by the wrong perception, the wrong knowledge. Now, that Maya, for Shankara, he defines that Maya as sadasat anirvachaniya. It is something anirvachaniya which cannot be expressed as either sat, real or unreal. It cannot be expressed as sat because because it is real until it lasts, and it is unreal when the knowledge dawns. So that's why he said it is anirvachaniya. It cannot be expressed as either sat or asat. Now, what happens is that jiva, the individual self, identifies with his body, her body, senses, mind, buddhi, and all these chitta-vrittis and all these things, and superimposes that on the Brahman. And that is what is known as adhyasa, the superimposition. And this is an extremely important term. Here that Shankara begins with his great commentary, his Mahabhashya, by explaining what is Brahma. Brahma meaning error, not by defining what is Brahman, because although the Brahman is the subject matter. So because this presents a philosophical problem for him, and he has to resolve it in some way. Now, one more thing is important here, that when Shankara says that the world is not real, that the world is mithya, it does not mean that that world is not existent at all. The problem is that any experience that can be contradicted by another experience is unreal. And so the ultimate measure of reality is that which cannot be contradicted by any other experience. And as such, then it has to be absolute, eternal, and all this unchanging, permanent. Otherwise, it could be contradicted by other things. So this is an important thing. So, for example, the experience of a dream can always be contradicted, is always contradicted by the experience of the dreaming state. So, for example, in the dream one can dream that one has won a lot of money on the lottery and he's spending that money, going around, traveling. But once when he wakes up, that reality, and it was felt as real as it can be. But now in this dreaming, in this waking state, that is contradicted by another. So that is the measure of reality which cannot be contradicted by any other experience. And this is very important in the Advaita Vedānta school. Now, a couple of more things before I begin reading text. It is important to say that adhyasa. Now, what is adhyasa? Adhyasa means superimposition. So one thing is superimposed on another. And we have two types of adhyasa. One is dharmi adhyasa and the other one is dharma adhyasa. Dharmi adhyasa is that kind of superimposition, superimposing Atman on Anatman. or anatman and on atman, because they are, the superimposition is always mutual. And for example, if atman is superimposed on an atman, then an atman will be mistaken as atman. And if if anatman is superimposed on atman, then atman will be mistaken as anatman. And then the second type of adhyasa is dharma adhyasa. Now the properties belonging to atman and anatman also will be imposed on that. Will be also mutually superimposed on each other. So superimposition of atman and anatman on one hand, and superimposition of their properties on the other. Okay, so now in this first here, very long sentence, this is the argument of the opponent. Opponent argues that for superimposition to take place, there has to be some similarities between the two things. But here, the situation is that there is no similarity at all between atman and anatman. So the sentence reads, Yushmat asmat pratya gocharayoho vishaya vishainoho tamah prakasha virudha svabhavayoho itaretara bhava anupapattau siddhayam tadharmanamapi sutaram itaretara bhava anupapatihi iti ataha asmat pratya gochare vishayini chidatmake yushmat pratya gocharasya vishayasya tadharmanam cha adhyasa tadviparyayena vishayinaha tadharmanam cha vishaye adhyaso mitya iti bhavitum yuktam. Now, like this. So as I said, the opponent will point out what are the differences between atman and atman. So we have here yushmat pratya gochara and asmat pratya gochara. Asmat pratya gochara means the sphere of concepts formulated as aham. So asmat here stands for aham. So all the experiences that come, and that will become clear more later, what is the meaning of aham here. So all the experiences that come under aham, which is also, atman is here also included, but also all the other experiences related to the notions related to the body, mind, etc. And yushmat pratya gochara stands for the sphere of the notions or concepts formulated as idam. So everything which is not aham, that means anatman, the world. Then vishaya vishayinoho. Now one is vishya. So this is the first remarkable difference. Yushmat pratya gochara and asmat pratya gochara. And the second one is vishaya and then one is vishayin. So vishaya is the object of perception, object of cognitions. And vishayin is the one who has cognitions about these objects. That means the subject and the object. So one is subject and one is the object. So that is the second remarkable difference between the two. Then tamah prakasha virudha svabhavayoho itaretara bhava anupapattau siddhayam. He says and then the third, okay, they are svabhavas. Their innermost nature is virudha. They are contrary to each other. They are contrary to each other, just like tamah and prakasha, like darkness and light. And so when we see siddhayam, when it is established that there is no justification, itaretara bhava anupapattau, when it is established that there is no similarity between the two, mutual similarity, itaretara bhava, then sutaram itaretara bhava anupapatihi, it is even more difficult to establish tadharmanamapi, that there is any kind of similarity between the properties. Now first, as I said, is dharmiyadhyasa. First he has to establish dharmiyadhyasa and then dharmadhyasa. Now the properties, the attributes of this other also, it is even more difficult to establish that there is any similarity between the property of the two. if the two don't match together. Then ityataha, therefore, asmat pratyaya gochare vishayini chidatmake yushmat pratyaya gocharasya vishayasya tadharmanam cha adhyasaha. The superimposition of that which is vishaya, the object of cognition, and that yushmat pratyaya gochara, and that sphere of the conceptions formulated under idam, to superimpose them on that which is chidatmaka, which is pure intelligence, intelligence alone, which is vishayin, which is the subject, and which is asmat pratyaya gochara, which is the sphere coming under the sphere formulated as aham, adhyasa. And then tadviparyayena vishayina, then in the reverse order, superimposing object on subject was one. Now in reverse order, superimposing subject on the object is that kind of adhyasa mitya iti bhavitum yuktam. It is proved, yuktam, it is established that it is mitya, that it is illusory, that this is error. It cannot be. It cannot. They have nothing in common. There is no similarity. Therefore, there is no possibility of any adhyasa here. This is the argument of the opponent. Now, tadhapi, Shankara. This is Shankara's reply. Tadhapi yet. Now, Vajaspati Mishra said, since we have here tadhapi, we have to assume, supply the yadyapi in the first sentence. So all of these arguments said before, although they are there, they are true, yet now the Shankara's answer. And the Shankara's answer is that this is true, all these things that you said, but the fact is that in the ordinary life, in the life of everyday's experience, this adhyasa does take place. So this is basically his answer. Tadhapi anyonya asmin anyonya atmakatam anyonya dharmascha adhyasya itaretara avivekena. Now this is the description of reality. This is what happens in life, he says. Anyonya asmin anyonya atmakatam adhyasya. Having superimposed the nature of one and another, the nature of object and subject, or subject and object, anyonya, mutually, anyonya dharmascha, and their properties. Now how? Itaretara adivekena, because there is no discrimination between the two. There is no discrimination between what is aham, what is atman, and what is anatman. So this just happens. And then atyanta viviktayoha dharma dharminoho mitya jnana nimitaha. And then, because of the atyanta, extreme dissimilarity between dharma and dharmin, which is caused by the mitya jnana, by the incorrect perception, by the wrong notion, what happens? Satya anarte mithunikritya. So having mixed up satya and anartha, the truth and untruth. Ahamidam mamaidam iti naisargikoyam loka vyavaharaha. He said, people, naisargika, naturally, spontaneously, originally, they just behave like that. How do they behave? There are two expressions here which describe how people behave. Ahamidam mamaidam iti. This is mine, or ahamidam, I am this. Now what does this mean? It means that, for example, if I say aham kashaha, or aham sthulaha, aham gauraha. Aham kashaha, I am weak. I am weak. But the weakness is not the property of aham. It is the property of the body. So that mixture, this is how that mixture of these two takes place. So this is Shankara's reply. Now he's going to define what is adhyasa. First, now the question here, koyam adhyaso nama iti. So what is adhyasa? He said, what is this adhyasa? Uchyate smrti rupaha. So this adhyasa is of the nature of memory, recollection. This is the definition. Then extension of that definition, paratra purava drishta avabhasa. This avabhasa here is another synonym basically. It doesn't mean what it means in Shaivism, but it means the wrong notion, wrong perception, error, just like Brahma. So Brahma, adhyasa, avabhasa, all synonyms basically. So this is the definition. Vachaspati Mishra in his commentary said that this is just the general kind of definition. Now he will present here 3 more definitions of 3 different schools. And the first one, tam kechit anyatra anyadharmadhyasaha iti vadanti. So kechit vadanti. So some say. Now about this kechit, about this some means some scholars belonging to some school. But which school, and it is not clear. And in the commentaries there is a lot of argument of what is actually. Some people say this is Nayayikas. Some people say this is the like Vachaspati Mishra. You would say that this is the definition of Buddhists. So tam kechit anyatra anyadharmadhyasa iti vadanti. So some say, some scholars say, that adhyasa is a superimposition of anyadharma, of some properties, different properties, onto anyatra, onto something else. Superimposition of different properties onto something else. Now, this definition is rejected by the second definition. And the third definition, and this is how Shankara writes, and here also, there is a first definition, then the first definition is rejected by the first definition is rejected by the second, and the second is rejected by the third. So then he puts himself in that position that he has to only deal with one definition, because they already refuted the first and second, so he has to deal only with the third one. So the second definition is by Mimamsaka Prabhakara. So he writes, Kechitu yatra tadadhyasaha tadviveka agra nibandhano brahma iti. So Kechitu, Kechit here means Prabhakara, and the Mimamsaka, so those people who belong to that school. So how they define Brahma or error. Now, why does he reject this definition? Okay, so the Brahma is caused by Nibandhana, is caused by agraha, not grasping, by not perception, by not grasping, by non-perception of that which is superimposed from that on which it is superimposed. Now, what is he saying here? He's saying here that there is really no positive erroneous cognition as such. It is only non-difference, non-perception of the difference between the two real experiences. So both of these two experiences are real. As for example, if I say aham sarpaha, this is a snake. Aham, so we have here two real cognitions. One is I am this, which is in front of us, and the second is sarpaha, which is memory. Now, non-discrimination between these two real cognition for Prabhakara is error, is Brahma, or this adhyasa. adhyasa. This is how it takes place. Now the third one, the third definition, which is according to Vachaspati Mishra definition of Nayayikas, Anyetu yatra yad adhyasaha tasya eva viparita dharmatva kalpanam achakshate. So now this third definition rejects the second on the grounds that that this non-perception of the difference between the two cannot really prompt us to action. For example, if I see a snake, there will be a reaction to it. We would want to run away. Or if I see silver in mother of pearl, we would want to get it. So there is an action here. So, and since the non-perception of the difference cannot really cause that kind of action, they reject it. So they say anyetu, and yet others, they also say that this is kalpana, that this is an assumption of the attributes of the attributes like those of the snake, viparita dharma, which possess the completely contrary properties to those on which it is superimposed. And so that identity takes place when these two are cognized together. Now, the Shankara says, sarvatha api tu anyasya anyadharma avavasatam na vyabhicharati. Now, the Shankara says, sarvatra api. In all these instances here, in all these definitions here, there is consistency. Na vyabhicharati. It is not contradictory. There is consistency here of this avavasatam, of this wrong perception, wrong cognition. Anyasya anyadharma avavas. So, in which the property of one are superimposed on another. So this is common to all of these definitions. That is his conclusion, which is basically the first definition that we read. Paratra purvadrishtamavasa. So this is basically that is his point. Tathacha, as for example, lokyarubhavaha, this is exactly what people experience, he says. And then he gives two examples. Shuktika hi rajavat avabhasate. Shuktika, mother of pearl, shines as erroneously cognized as silver. Or sometimes also that one moon can appear as being two. So these are these characteristics of error. Now, again, the opponent asking question. Katham punaha pratyak atmani avishaye adhyaso vishaya tadharmanam. Now he's going to inquire again. Katham punaha. How again is it possible to superimpose is that adhyasa? How is that adhyasa of the vishaya, of the object and its properties? So the object of cognition and the properties of that object of cognition. How can that be superimposed on that which is not vishaya, which is not an object, and which is that self, which is that supreme self? Now the point here is what he's Mimamsaka, the opponent is saying, that self that you Vedantins are advocating, that you Vedantins are teaching, does not really figure in the experience. It is not there. And it is avishaya. So how can it be superimposed? So how can something which is object be superimposed on that which is not object? So this is what the question is here. So, and further elaborated that same question. Sarvohi puro avasthite vishaye vishaya antaram adhyasyati. So, it is always that Vishaya. On the Vishaya which is present in front, another Vishaya, Vishaya Antaram, is superimposed. It is always just like in the case of the snake which is superimposed on the rope. And Yushmat Pratyaya Apetasya Cha Pratyagatmanaha Vishayatvam Pravishi. But you, Vedantin, are telling us, you Vedantins are telling us that that which is not the object of experience, this Pratyagatman, is somehow then superimposed on that which is Yushmat Pratyaya, on that which is basically the object, which comes under the notion, formulated as notion of this. Now, Uchyate, this is Shankara's answer here. Natavad ayam ekantena avishayah. He says that this ekantena, exclusively, he says that this Atman is not exclusively avishaya. So, for Vedantins, the point is this, that this Atman, Brahman or Atman, being omnipresent and eternal, it is present everywhere. And so it is also included under this, aham. But it is mixed up with all the other notions and conceptions that arise from the body, senses, etc. So, but it is also there. So it is not only avishaya, but it is in some roundabout way, it is also avishaya. So that's what he says here. Natavat ayam ekantena avishaya. It is not only avishaya. Why? Asmat pratya vishayatvat. Because, this is what I just explained, because it is asmat pratyaya vishayatvat, because it is the object of cognition that comes under the asmat pratyaya, under the notion formulated as aham. It is also present there. Aparokshatvat. And because cha, aparokshatvat cha, and because it is directly experienced. Nayamasti niyamaha puravasthite eva vishaye vishayantaram adhyasitavyam iti. Now he says there is no any kind of a fixed rule here, that it requires that the that on that object which is present here, another object has to be superimposed. So this is the meaning is this, that there is only there are two objects. One is perceptible. There are two perceptible objects. That object which is present, on which something is superimposed, has to be also present, directly perceived. So there is no any, he says, no any fixed rule that it has to be superimposed. Puro avastite eva vishaye, vishaya antaram. So it doesn't need to be that then another vishaya is superimposed on that which is, another one perceptible vishaya is superimposed on another perceptible vishaya. Now, and why not? He's giving an example here. Aprakyakshe apihi akashe balaha tala malinata adi adhyasyanti. He says, just like in the case of Akasha. And then Akasha is not perceptible. Akasha cannot be perceived. Just like that Atman cannot be perceived. It is, but people superimpose various qualities on that, just like color blue. So that's what he said. Apratyaksha hi Akasha. Although that Akasha is apratyaksha, it cannot be perceived. Valaha, the ignorant people, superimpose various malinas, various impurities, various qualities on it. Evam avirudhaha pratyagatmani anatmana adhyasaha. Therefore, he says that there is no contradiction. There is no contradiction in superimposing pratyagatmani api anatman. That which is to superimpose that which is not atman on that which is atman. So he says, therefore there is no contradiction here at all. Then tam etam evam lakshanam adhyasyam panditaha avidya iti manyante. And so panditaha, the learned people, consider superimposition metaphorically. So for them, that superimposition is metaphorically then called avidya. And then tad vivekena cha vastu swarupa avadharanam vidyamahuhu. And also the same pandits, the same learning people call vidya, that is vidya, is then the ascertainment of vastu swarupam, of that which is the nature of reality, which is the nature of reality, the Atman. So it is that vidya which discriminates the real from unreal. Tad vivekena. Tad here stands for anatman. So it discriminates vastu swarupam from anatman. So this is the vidya according to these learned people. Today I'm going to finish here and continue reading the same text, and also Nandikeshwara Kashika in the next